Hey, welcome to the TTSG podcast. I'm Lee, and in this episode, I'll be interviewing Marco Pecota. Marco Pecota is owner of the publishing studio Raybox Games. He's a game designer and developer with a career in the board game industry stretching right back to the 90s. He designed and co-designed the games and supplements for Legions of Steel, Planet Storm, Inferno, Battles of the Abyss, and Abyss the RPG. In 1997, Marco took a 25-year hiatus from the industry, only to return with a unique Paths Unknown system featured in its first release, Escape from Stalingrad Z, and its sequel, Escape from Project Riza. Marco's new game, The Gates of Nilheim, has just gone live on GameFound, so if you want to find out more about that, there'll be a link down below, and we've got lots to look forward to for the rest of the year and into 2024. This is Marco's second time on the podcast, and the topic we've decided to go with today is genre in tabletop skirmish games. So this is perfect because this is something that Marco's very passionate about. So if you're interested in creating your own games, or particularly solo games, then hopefully you'll get some valuable information here. We're going to jump right into it. I've got a series of questions to ask Marco, and so hopefully you'll enjoy this episode 3 of the new TTSG podcast. How do you decide on a genre for a new tabletop game?
Well, never mind tabletop, any game really, right? But how do you decide? Like, at least from my point of view, it's what you most are interested in. So, like, I'm really interested in World War II, and I have a big interest in horror. So, World War II zombies was a good choice for me. So from the point of view of, enjoying the process is creating a genre, working in a genre that you enjoy. Now, I enjoy lots of genres, watch all kinds of movies, whether it's sci-fi or fantasy or even like, Blade Runner, the type of, noir type of stuff. So, and as a designer, I want to design different things because it's more interesting to kind of delve into other things. So the primary thing I would say, is to work on something that you're interested in, but I would highly recommend to do cross-genre stuff. So like mix two genres that you like, and that'll better allow you to create a more interesting or distinct kind of genre that your players will play in. So even World War II and horror is, a mixed genre. Yes, there's a lot of World War II horror video type games, and people love that sort of stuff. But as far as tabletop games, there's not a lot. There's some, so that's a good one. But it could be anything. It could be like you want to do Aztecs cyberpunk. Like, why not? Like, no one's got an Aztec cyberpunk one, so you could totally do that. And if you're into like history and that sort of thing, and you're into cyberpunk, combine historical with cyberpunk, or really, whatever you find that will you'll like and will kind of set you apart from other games that are out there.
So what genre do you think is the most popular? And what do you think keeps those popular genres relevant? I love the idea of mixing it together, but you see a lot of like sci-fi, don't you? So what do you think? The
most popular genre is zombies. That is the most okay, I'm talking about pop culture, right? So right. Pop culture, it's zombies. The most popular genre in tabletop gaming is Warhammer 40K. Not even sci-fi. It's just, that's the most popular. 80% of everyone who plays tabletop games plays Warhammer 40K. So that is absolutely, so we might as well not even talk about it that way, because it's just like, yeah, okay, so you got that and then the rest of the world. But yeah, so sci-fi would be the biggest. I think as far as kind of games, whether it's tabletop skirmish or, that are very popular, are kind of the horror, zombie stuff, and the fantasy stuff, because D&D is, a very, very big influential engine, a game that's out there. And so you got a lot of D&D players, if they're looking to play something tabletop, they easily gravitate to a fantasy kind of setting. So aside from Warhammer 40K, so not sci-fi, Warhammer 40K, I would say it's fantasy and horror, more targeted towards zombies when it comes to horror. Those are the two biggest, I think. And then after that, like sci-fi isn't, it may not even be third. Well, maybe it's third, but it's not first.
Right, just with Warhammer, with like skirmish games, you think?
Well, yeah, when you Warhammer, whether it's Warhammer, well, okay, so if you're talking specifically skirmish, then yeah, more along the line of like Blackstone Fortress, I guess would be considered skirmish and that sort of thing, right? So
because it's interesting how like sci-fi seems to be more popular for like a skirmish game, but when you start going more into like RPG, more solo, I think fantasy kind of takes over and becomes more popular.
Well, yeah. Now, if you're talking games in general, then that's a whole other thing, right? So we're talking about basically miniature games or board games with miniatures that are like Blackstone Fortress, right? Or like Space Hulk. So anything, GW's got a heavy is the heavyweight, and it's sci-fi. And then after that, it's probably Star Wars, the Star Wars miniatures game, right? And then so sci-fi would be the biggest when you look at it that way. But even they're cross-genre. Like Star Wars is fantasy, sci-fi. Warhammer is like dark, grim, dark, like gritty sci-fi. It's a different kind of sci-fi to if you're playing Star Trek or whatever, right? So even within the genres of these very popular genres, there's other subgenres. But I think once you get to independence, because that's what it really is. So you've got Star Wars and you got Warhammer and Star Wars or whatever, and then you got everyone else is basically independent, creating stuff. And when you get to the independence, horror, it's bigger than sci-fi. I think it's bigger than sci-fi. And then fantasy, like if you look, or maybe fantasy then horror. Like if you consider something like Gloomhaven. Like, would you consider Gloomhaven in the realm of like miniature, like skirmish games? I mean, you got 2 to 4 characters, and you're fighting a bunch of enemy in a map.
Yeah, it's similar, isn't it? It's close.
It is. It's exactly skirmish because you have a small amount of troops against a small amount of troops. That's your skirmish level, right? I mean, you can do a little bit broader skirmish. If you go to platoon level, platoon skirmish is a bit different. But as far as skirmish is concerned, Gloomhaven I would consider to be a skirmish game. I mean, you get miniatures in the game, and you have standees that you can replace with miniatures. They're basically miniatures, like they're figures. Let's put it that way. So you know that's huge. Like Gloomhaven's hundreds of thousands, bigger than anything outside of Games Workshop. It's bigger. So that's yeah. So that's what we got.
So do you think with Games Workshop, it almost becomes like people see it as the gateway genre for newcomers to the hobby because it just stands out so much and the marketing's so heavy? Do you think that's why it gives that impression?
Yeah, it's absolutely the gateway drug to miniature gaming. It's basically the gateway drug to miniature gaming, right? So, and the reason is because they're so popular already and they have the money to invest. They have their stores and they... when kids are passing by in the mall, like they have stores in the malls, they have stores all over the place, right? So when kids are passing by, they look and they go, wow, this is amazing, which it is. It's like, oh my goodness, right? And then the parents are like, well, let's go, they want to go in. And then they're like, hey, you want to try it? So they're very inviting and they get people in and they play with the miniatures. And then after they play and they start, they invest thousands of dollars or whatever they do. Like how much you get into it, and they mature. The mature players, most of us start experimenting and playing with other games outside of Warhammer. I mean, they still might play Warhammer, or let's face it, some get very disenchanted because now I got to buy a new army and they've changed this, so now I got to spend another $500 and I don't want to. So they get angry and then they look for other games. But it is, yeah. So it's number one. It's just got the most people. It's literally got hundreds of millions of dollars behind it. Like maybe, like so much behind it. So, yeah.
Yeah, I'm in that kind of place now with Warhammer. I'm discovering behind Warhammer, there's just like this massive world of games you can explore. It's incredible, right?
Yeah. And usually less, more manageable finance. Like when I was designing Escape from Stalingrad Z, I have a $30 book set, which you can play the entire game. It's got a huge 100-page scenario book. It's like chock full of information and 50 maps and all kinds of cool stuff. But $30, like 25 pounds, and you got it all. You don't need to buy anything else if you buy that. And then, of course, you can just use your own miniatures, or you can decide to buy other miniatures. But your investment is very small. In other games, and even if you go full blown, it's like 30 miniatures. So you don't have to paint 100 odd miniatures. You don't have to field 100 odd miniatures and that sort of thing. So I think there's a lot, and what I'm doing, but you're working on a game, everyone's working on a game. It's like you're in Hollywood with scripts.
Yeah, it feels like. Yeah. So there's so many genres we could choose from, and I love how you like blend them together, and I can certainly see that in other games for sure. And now you mention it with like Warhammer, how you even see like the Roman influence going into it, like the historical.
Oh, for sure, yeah, that's what those guys came from, a kind of historical background, right? I mean,
But do you think any genres would be challenging to adapt into a tabletop game?
No. Actually, the more weird it is, almost the more fun it would be to design. Like if you were going to do one with furries, right? But just think of it. Like imagine if you could do a Monty Python skirmish game. It would be like the most hilarious thing to do, right?
That would be
right. So I think the ones that would be more challenging are the ones that you want that wouldn't be strictly about combat. And that I think can be quite interesting. Like if you were to do a game, let's say you want to do a skirmish game and you want it to be Blade Runner. Well, that'll be tough because you got really one Blade Runner. Maybe you can have a team of 3 or 4, but then it's really then a lot about the story of what's happening, and you'd be basically playing replicants or Blade Runners, I guess. And maybe you can create another faction. So we're saying Blade Runner, but it could be whatever, a cyberpunk-ish kind of thing. So you got to figure out, how do I make these things work, right? And so if you're going to do cyberpunk, then you got to be like, okay, the first thing you go to is gangs or corporations, because cyberpunk's out of corporations. So you got your one corporation against another corporation. Actually, now that I'm talking about it, you can totally do it. So half the time, if it seems like a hard genre, you just kind of like tell yourself all about well, what would you do? And then you kind of, it'll all come out, and you're like, oh my God, that's actually a good idea. We can do that, right? So
when you're mixing like 2 genres, do you have like one in mind that's going to be the predominant genre, or does one naturally overtake and come to the forefront?
I think so. I think you gotta kind of figure the genre that's going to be predominant, and then you add the kind of the icing on the cake or the spices. So it was World War II with me. And then I added zombies. So not just horror, but zombies. So specifically zombies, right? But now I'm working on another one that has a Viking horror. Well, actually, I call it Nordic horror, and it's Vikings. And I wanted to create it, like I could just do Viking fantasy, of course, and kind of fantasy is horror. It's got dragons and all kinds of shit. So, but I'm talking about like really integrating it. So when I'm working on this game called Gates of Nilheim, and it incorporates Vikings with specifically the undead lore of Vikings. So I'm not doing zombies per se. Because they didn't call them zombies for one thing, right? But the Vikings got a ton of undead, who basically are zombies. So except they're zombies that are armed and can chop you with their axes and stuff. So that's how I went with it. But it was first coming. That one came first from, I want to do a fantasy type of game that uses the same rule set, the Paths Unknown rule set. I want to do a fantasy game, and to attract, first of all, I'm interested in fantasy too, but also to attract that crowd, people who wouldn't be interested in World War II, but would be interested in fantasy, especially with the people playing D&D and whatnot. So that's what I first wanted to do. I figured I'd do Vikings because it's a little bit different. Like it's even not regular fantasy. It's not just like wizards and whatever. So I didn't want to do that. There was a lot of that out there. And there is a lot of Vikings. So Vikings is kind of going on a wave. So I chose Vikings. There's a lot of TV shows and movies coming out with that. And then I decided to spice it up with specifically setting it in hell and using horror elements and horror kind of mythology, but very specific to the undead. So that's that crossover that happens there.
That's cool. You kind of got into a question I've got lined up here, which is good actually, like the influence of other media on your games and the timing of releasing games. And I was going to ask, what do you think about releasing a game at the same time, say, a popular TV series is about to come out on Netflix or Amazon or whatever?
Well, usually you certainly it's difficult to plan that. It's like, but you could, in a way, like if you were patient and you knew something was coming out. So my feeling is I would release it just after something like that came out, because you want it to get out there. You want people to be then showing it and talking about it more as soon as the first episode hits or the first couple episodes, and then you would release it then. That would be the best, I believe, the best thing you could do, especially as an indie designer. But some things are tried and true, like something that keeps going strong. So I chose Vikings. Vikings are probably, they're still moving, it's still moving quite strongly in the media. So that was a good choice, right? And zombies are always a good choice because that's still the biggest TV stuff that you can get. So I think if you can time it, I think it's good. Like basically pick something that is it's within pop culture, or pick a secondary theme that's within the pop culture, right? So World War II isn't in pop culture really. I mean, of course, there's fans of historical who love the history of that, but zombies are. So put those two together, you get, Call of Duty zombies.
I guess you'll then go into two different audiences as well that you can bring in together.
That's true. Like I was, anecdotally, I was in Holland when I first started, promoting Stalingrad Z, and I had the big poster up, life-size poster of the two combatants, like the sniper Dasha and Steiner, the German sergeant, and they're basically surrounded by zombies, and it's the cover of the game, and people were just standing there in front of it, and they're just looking at it. Like literally, this is like, because it's a pretty impressive piece. And then I'm like, oh, are you into World War II? And they're like, no. Well, we're into zombies. I'm like, and this looks super cool, right? So it was like they were into zombies and they totally want to play a game with these, but World War II. So it was interesting enough to them. I mean, the zombies is what attracted them, and then it's kind of a little bit different. And then I said to them, actually, because out of internal joke for me, it's like, well, what about Rome? Are you interested in like Roman historicals? And they're like, no. And then I said, well, what about gladiators? They go, well, I don't know. I guess gladiators are okay. I go, what about gladiators with zombies? Go, oh, that would be amazing. So it's like, you take Roman historical. I think it looks cool, but I'm not going to learn and play that. It goes, what about gladiator combat? And people will be like, oh, that's kind of cool. You got your armor, your hip spots, maybe. And then you just throw zombies in there. It's suddenly like, it's the coolest thing ever. Which, if you think about it, go, yeah, that would be pretty cool. Arena battles, you got starved tigers. You got Roman gladiators and then zombies, just would create this cool aesthetic and whatever. So yeah.
It does sound fun.
There's a million there's so many ideas. Like Tom and I, who I work with. So Tom Frank is my co-designer. We work together on everything. And then I have a bunch of other people I work with too, but we have too many ideas. We can't complete everything. The ideas that we have, like, in other words, there's so much out there for ideas, people, that no one should have a trouble finding an interesting theme to work with. Like, there's so many, thousands and thousands.
So when you finally pick one and you go for it and you start really designing the game, how do you navigate that fine line between using the genre tropes but being cliche?
Oh, well, sometimes you want to go over that line because it's fun and cool, like whatever, right? I think that, well, it's hard not to, once you got zombies, it's okay to have some cliche things, I think, because people know it and they associate with it, right? I mean, you don't want to you don't want it to look stupid, I guess, right? Or you don't want it to feel like, chintzy. like you can't be all cliche stuff, but there's going to be something in there because you can't avoid it. For example, just the regular fantasy stuff. So working on Gates of Nilheim, even just picking Vikings a little less cliche than having like a paladin. It's a little bit less, but it still has its cliches because it's Vikings. But when I was designing it to avoid the cliches, I went historical as much as possible. So there's no one has horns on their helmet except for the one evil guy. He's got a horn on his helmet. But Vikings didn't have horns on their helmet, so it's a cliche to have horns on your helmet. So I'm like, yeah, no. And then, for the most part, my guys, how I like to do it, like even the World War II stuff, is I use realistic things, like the armor they actually used, the weapons they actually used, and then add in things like ruin stones in that case, or like if you read the mythology, add actual mythology in there where you're working from existing material that's that maybe not even everyone knows about because you've researched it to find out about it. So there's a lot of good stuff in there, especially if you combine with historical, because that's one way to make sure you're not as cliche and you're kind of using, because everyone uses the cliches and everyone falls to those traps. A lot of designers do. So kind of basing it in reality a little bit maybe would help avoid the cliches. Yeah.
And so do you find, especially with World War II, do you have to be careful not to base it on real events, or do you look, like you say, do you look to real events, even like that recent?
You do look for real events. So, well, specifically Stalingrad Z was exactly Stalingrad happened, so we put it right into that situation. And other things that are happening in that universe were going to be based on real events. And then it's like the what if, right? What if then, zombies outbroke in, what if they up at the Alamo? What if they turn into zombies? So then you can do a game about the Alamo and zombies. Like what if? So it's cool to use it in real. Also, people associate, they recognize it, right? Like, oh, the Alamo, and then what, the zombies, like what's happened? Like already I know, but like I don't know a ton about the Alamo. I'm not a huge, kind of that era fan. But there are people that are or love westerns and stuff like that. That it's in the same ilk, and then that would be like a touchstone for them, right? So.
Yeah, it's interesting you've said about the what if. I've been talking about that the past week. Like, it's really cool prompt. Just saying what if, and then it just prompts so many ideas, doesn't it? Just those two words.
Yeah, for sure.
That's really interesting. So the history and mythology, a big part. And then I guess, like we talked about earlier, we're influenced by media, but certainly by like TV shows, movies. But how do you have to be careful, and how do you like go around like licensed properties, intellectual properties, if there's something you really want to do, but it's quite close to something that already exists?
Oh, it doesn't matter if it's close. You can still do it. It doesn't matter. As long as you're not using their words. Like if you want to do something that's like Star Wars but not Star Wars, well then just do it. Like you don't have don't put the Death Star in there, and don't put TIE fighters in there. Put your own things, and then everyone's gonna know. Probably, oh, it's just like there's not necessarily a good thing if you go too close because it's just ripping off Star Wars. But from a marketing point of view, if you have enough people saying you're ripping off Star Wars, you'll get more news out about your game, right? Because like, oh my God, did you see that Star Wars? So it's that more it's about your reputation that you got to worry about than someone coming and suing you because you got a game that has similar aspects to basic IPs, which is intellectual property that's out there. And I think a game that's out called Final Girl. I don't know if anyone knows what Final Girl is. It's basically like all the scary movies you ever saw, but not. So The Thing, which is a great John Carpenter movie, they have it called Organism, and it's all set in a winter station. Like the setting is the same, but they just use their own people and their own kind of monsters. So I wouldn't worry about that too much, as long as you just don't use their words, right? Don't use what they, yeah.
Cool. So we talked about marketing. How does the genre influence how you would market the game?
Well, first of all, let's see, what type of marketing would you do as I guess we're talking indie designers here, right? I mean,
yeah.
Yeah, okay. So the only place you're going to market your game as an indie designer, or one is you're going to run stuff at shows, but that's very limited in how many shows you get to go to because it's usually local, and maybe you can do one or two big ones if you travel there. That's going to cost, it's going to cost what it's going to cost. And then as far as paid advertising, you're going to work with Facebook, and really, that's the main way you're going to go. So there's a lot of free stuff you can do on Facebook. So how would it influence it? I'm doing a solo game that uses miniatures, and it's in World War II. So then I'll go look at groups that embody that, right? So there's a group called Wargaming with Miniatures, Solo Wargaming with Miniatures. So that's like a perfect fit for me. Now I can't just go in there and bombard it with this is my game and play my game. You have to be in there, you have to engage in the conversations, but then once in a while, or you can take pictures of stuff that you're doing and share it, and usually everything's okay, and that's how you'll start getting the word out. So that's how you can utilize it that way. And then of course the other way to get some word out is working with influencers and people who can cover your game, whether they're reviewing it or whether they're previewing it or whatnot. So you can reach out to them, and they come, they're different levels. It's hard to work with the bigger ones because they're just busy. But there's tons of them out there. So, and then do your own videos and stuff, right? But doing your own videos, that doesn't tie into the genre thing. But basically what you can do is, as an indie, is go online and find, it doesn't even have to be just Facebook, your Instagram thing, wherever you do social media, find the people who love that kind of stuff, and that's who you want to talk to. That's who you want to kind of like preach to, I guess.
Yeah, I guess, like you said earlier, if you choose a genre you're interested in, you're probably already part of that community, aren't you? So you're in it already.
Yeah. Often you are. Yeah. That's right. So, for example, my game, anyone knows, my games play on a book, right? It's a scenario book, and you play actually on the book. So Jaws of the Lion is a game that does that too. There is a big Facebook group for Jaws of the Lion. Now I can't go on there and say, hey, check out my game, whatever. So I can talk about Jaws of the Lion. I can ask questions of what are the things, I'm working on a game that plays on a book. Is that something that you guys like? And then they all answer. You get engagement that way, right? So yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Nice. So a lot of games use expansions to keep it interesting, keep the story going. And so can you explain the role of expansions and add-ons in enriching the genre experience?
Well, focus on the game first, because so I like add-ons and expansions, but what I like more is sequels. So I like more about creating a second game that's in the same universe as the first game, but it's not an expansion. It's a standalone game that if people like the first game, now they can play the second game and the story continues, or the universe continues. But that's a type, because I like creating kind of a storytelling type of game, and it's a solo game. If you're doing a book that's a tabletop book, then that's more suitable for expansions, because you're not really telling a story there anymore. You're just you have a universe that things are set in, and then those you will expand on that setting. So that expansion would take you to another part of the world that setting is in, or it gives you a new forces that you can fight against or develop. So I think it's important to, I think that it's important, because if you get your game out there and people are playing it, you really need that first. Get yourself up to, 500 people playing it. Like if you're at 86 or 120, like it's good. You want to keep growing it, and once you get to a certain level, you can then release something that's an expansion that starts adding to it, and that expand, and people are going to expect, if you want your game to live, you're going to need to keep feeding the game, because people want to see that it's being supported and that new stuff's coming out, and that it's a developing game that's not going to be dead on the shelf in a year or whatever. Now, advice I would give to anyone who's created a game or creates a game is to give some sort of expansive material as a DLC content. So you kind of, whether it's maybe every other month or so, you publish a new scenario or a new weapon or some new maps, something that will give the people something new to look at and read over, or it could be a story or whatever, but something. This is something you're going to give away for free, but it's not like a whole game or whatever. It's just something small, and that you could like maybe write in a couple days, or even overnight, or on a weekend or something. That that I think would be really important to keep the blood flowing, so to speak, both like in and out of your body.
So when you're designing games, let's go off to more like the production of the game and the art side of it. Do you find that different genres require different approaches to the mechanics, or with your paths unknown, is it easy to like adapt that to different genres? How does that work?
So I think kind of the holy grail is having this one set of rules that works for everything, right? And I've come close to it, I think, because there's a lot of mixture. So I think there is a few breaks, though, if you're doing basic tactical warfare, right? When you're talking about skirmish games and that. So there's a break when you go, I think, from modern warfare with rifles and pistols, right, to fantasy. So there's somewhere in there where the guns kind of take over, and then the thrust of the tactical, like in real life, the way you handle tactically will be different. So the rules need to adapt to what would make sense, unless you don't care if it makes sense necessarily. Like, as soon as you add in wizards or whatever, then like, well, whatever you want, like you can do, fireballs. So that's got nothing to do with anything. But basically, yeah, that's where I see there's a break. So when I was working with Gates of Nilheim, well, in when I was doing my modern skirmish gaming, like Stalingrad and Escape from and Project Riza, they have facing. I wanted to have facing because that's a big tactical element. And when you're like seconds are passing for each kind of what would be considered a turn, where you're pointing your gun is going to matter a lot more because other people are pointing their guns at you. So there's that I felt that was it worked well within the realm of my rules for when you're playing a game that have a lot of tactical significance, right? And make it challenging that way. While when I went to Gates of Nilheim, which is the Viking game, I took away that because facing. So it's just that you can attack anywhere around you because that's more hand to hand. There is bows and stuff like that, but overall, you're engaging in a close quarter. So that means that's different and things are flowing a little bit different, right? So I think there is a break. You have to think about that when you're designing. Like there will be changes between one and the other, but my games closely follow each other, so they use the same kind of structure. You can use usually the same turn structure. You can use often the same, like how damage works and stuff like that. But there will be some changes.
Yeah. So do you find like with like the ranged weapons in the World War II Stalingrad Z games, you would move towards more combat in Gates of Nilheim and push the combat weapons foremost?
You mean that melee weapons?
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. So in Gates of Nilheim, there is bow and arrows and stuff like that, but you don't so what you have in World War II is these machine guns that fire lots of bullets. So you could attack multiple targets, and you could spread your fire over an area, or you could what they call suppress an area so people can't move through it. So that doesn't really exist in the other one, in the Viking lore. So yeah, so combat's going to happen more often hand to hand because that's how it really happened. So that's the way it is. But again, we do have bows, and I kind of introduced to have a bit of variety. We have a sling. So like as an example, so a bow has arrows, so you could run out of arrows when you fire your bow. So, but it's it's more powerful than a sling, or has a better range than a sling, right? Let's say. So that would be the aspects or the stats for that weapon would be it has a better range and maybe does a bit more damage, especially if it's attacking against an armored target. While a sling, but you got to have ammo, you can run out, or arrows. While a sling is not as powerful, but then you never have to worry about running out of. I mean, as long as you can always carry rocks and stuff. I mean, you could create actual things to sling at you, but if in a pinch you can get whatever you want. So that's a way of basically, we introduce introducing missile weapons basically, but then creating a variety. So we've got a sling, we've got bows, like a long bow, short bow. There's a few different things that we got in there. Throwing knives. You can throw a spear, stuff like that.
Do you find that when you're thinking up genres, some are more suited to the solo co-op play as well?
I don't think so. I think that any genre will be suited for the solo play. Anything. Yeah, absolutely anything. In fact, yeah, absolutely. I don't know what else to say because they're really, you could do anything.
You can just do it.
I mean, that I can think of. No, I think everything has a story, right? So if we're talking solo play, there's got to be a story in there somewhere. When you're talking about versus skirmish, less story because you're playing against someone, so nobody's reading that. There's lore that I think is important to get people into the feel like they're in the universe, and character development for the ones that you might be playing and that sort of thing. But yeah, with solo play could be anything. Honestly, the way I always look at solo play is if they can make a movie about it, you can make a game out of it.
Right, like the hero's journey almost.
Yeah,
that kind of thing.
Yeah.
That's cool. So when you're thinking like solo play, you would go for more story around characters. When you're looking at more skirmish games, you're looking more of the world and the universe they're fighting in, rather than.
That's right.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah, I would say that's true, but I want to also say that the solo game is also a skirmish game, right? So, or can be a skirmish game.
So you've got to take both into account, really, I guess. Yeah.
Well, what I mean is the difference between the two is one is you have an opponent, so you're not reading the same story, right? When you want to be engaged in solo, you have time, so you want to read. Well, you can just play a straight up tactical solo war game, absolutely, where you're just fighting stuff. There's no history involved. There's nothing. It's just, but that has to be to make it interesting. Either it has to be more complicated, more challenging rules. Let's say, if you want to be engaged. Otherwise, it gets boring. But if you have a story component, of course, you still want good mechanics, but it doesn't have to be as complicated because you're not just about the mechanics. You're about discovering things and clues and continuing the story and, upgrading your weapons, maybe going to the market, the whole thing, and the people that you're going to meet or like your characters that you're going to meet, right? So, yeah.
Nice. And what about artwork? How does the genre influence that?
Well, yeah, you basically want to choose artwork that makes sense for the genre you're working with, but it doesn't really matter. You can totally use a different style to create a different aesthetic. So I've seen some games out there, that use, you can kind of pick almost like historically different type of art, right? If you can do, Ray Punk stuff, if you want to go that route. If you want to go that route.
There's a cat in the scene.
Yeah, there's a cat on the scene. It's Minerva. Minerva is her name.
You're like a James Bond villain there, like stroking.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
As I'm talking to you.
So like art is like, art's kind of, I know what I like and that's what I want. I like when you talk about art, I just want it to look professional. It can't be cartoony. It can't be whatever. Just pro, like not pro. Like it just looks really. I guess it. But you got to work with what you got too, right? Like, you don't got a big budget. Use less art. Better to lose less art. Well, like for example, I was doing World War II, and even for the Viking one, I didn't want to have to draw all the friggin' weapons. There's lots of weapons. So all I did is I took, images of the weapons, and then I just made them black. So it's more of a black and white style, but it works with the style that I'm designing. Like it fits together. So not only is it the art of the actual image, but it's the aesthetic of the layout, the colors that you use to put stuff together. That's got nothing to do directly with the art, but how your eye interprets it, basically, or how your page is laid out so that it's welcoming and it looks cool and it works within it. So with me and doing the black and white stuff, the weapon's black, and then when I was doing Stalingrad Z, which is winter, it was white background, right? And that made sense, and red for blood and stuff like that, right? So I think you can work less is more if you don't have a budget. Just don't put a lot of art in it. Get it, blow your budget. Use get someone good to do the cover. But even there, you don't have to necessarily spend a lot of money if you can use pieces of like with my Viking ones, I just did a really cool leather. It looks like a leather bound cover, so there's no artwork on the actual rule books. There is on the box, but you know what I mean. So the short answer is you can use whatever art you want, and it's fine. Like whatever genre. There's really no like especially if you want to do things askew, right? The idea for me is to eschew things, like it's not so it looks like everything else. So that's going to be a good way to do it. If you wanted, if you did, what's the name of the famous American artist who did all the stuff like in the malt shops and stuff like that. And he did like a lot of family stuff. There's a barber shop, usually a kid, and there's all these kind of. You did that. You did sci-fi with it, or like another way to look at it is Wes Anderson movies. Wes, like it's got a total style to its own. It doesn't matter what universe it's in. In fact, people have been doing AI versions of Star Wars if it was Wes Anderson. Have you seen that?
No, I haven't. No.
Oh my God, it's amazing.
I need to check it out though, because I love
Wes Anderson Star Wars. Like everyone check that out. So that'll be a good example of how you've got Star Wars, which we all know what it looks like, and someone reinterpreting it in a different kind of look, and it's really kind of cool and funny, I guess. And but if that movie, if someone, I mean, I know I would watch it if they made the movie of it, even just because the aesthetics are so different, and even if they redid the same movie, but with Wes Anderson aesthetics. So I guess that's what I want to capsulize is like go standard, like go what you like, but don't be afraid to break the bonds. And if you don't have a budget really, then less is more, and work more on layout and stuff like that, like getting what the book looks like outside of the images. And if you're doing miniatures, then use the miniatures. And if you don't have your own miniatures, talk to someone else to use it. So if someone came to me, I want to do a zombie World War II thing, I would actually be, that's great. Can I use your miniatures? I'd be, yeah, sure. You can use my miniatures, use them in the pictures, use them in your book. I'm not going to charge you anything. Most designers are happy to share it. People just give me credit in the book that, the miniatures come from Stalingrad Z or whatever. So use miniatures, use photography. So I would definitely say also brush up on your photography, check out YouTube channels and the best way to shoot stuff. Your cell phone probably has a good enough camera on it. You don't need to get a camera. I actually invested in a cell phone that cost more, but that I could have good images. So I splurged on the phone, but now I can use it to shoot a whole bunch of stuff. So definitely use the sculpts and stuff like that. I mean, you're playing a miniature game, so that's totally appropriate to show that, whether they're all by themselves or whether they're in, using terrain and stuff like that. Yeah.
Yeah, it definitely stands out when I'm looking through a book and there's a mix of photos and artwork. You want to see the game on the table, don't you? And also terrain. You want to see it interacting with terrain and the models. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. And if you look at GW stuff, they don't have a lot of artwork. Actually, look at they repeat the artwork they have in it, right? They take pieces. I mean, there's some, but often they use mostly it's about the pictures. I guess it depends. They go through their eras. But yeah, if you take a look at their books, I believe last time there wasn't a lot of artwork. It was more like the pictures of the miniatures, which you're going to be playing with, right? And some artwork. But like they have a budget that they could do the whole thing artwork if they wanted. They could blow $50,000 on artwork if they wanted to, but they don't. They don't do almost any of it. So there you go. There's like the biggest, most powerful miniature gaming company in the world, and they don't do a lot of artwork. Of course, they do great covers, but inside, not a lot.
Yeah, that's true. I'm thinking like the White Dwarf magazines. When I look through it, I'm more drawn to like battle reports where you see the image of the battlefield with the models on. Yeah, well, it's nice. But yeah, that's a good point then. That's cool.
There you go.
Nice. That's awesome. All right, so let's wrap things up a little bit. What do you see? Well, how do you see the future of tabletop games evolving, and what are you excited about for the future?
Well, I see GW remaining there as the uncontested champion. Their pricing is. Sometimes you talk about them like maybe they'll outprice themselves, but they're going to be fine. They got lots of money and I think they'll adjust, and So that's not going to change. I think that you've seen some, the fact that they're creating games like Blackstone Fortress and they've reprinted it. Like, as soon as they reprint something, you're like, oh, well, that must mean something, because otherwise they wouldn't. Them. Nope, that's it. We're not doing it again. It's like, what? Come on, we need more. They won't even reprint it if more people want it. It's like, no, too bad. Like, it really. So when they make the decision to reprint something, that means they think that so games like that where you have less miniatures, you can kind of buy it all together and play the game. I think that's one thing that's going to happen with Skirmish gaming. I think that games like my own, which are solo play and kind of are have everything you need to play the game, is also a way that things are going to are going to change and grow. There's more going to be a draw, I think, for people who, as far as the gaming is concerned, that are looking for different genres to play stuff, just to have a variety, a set of rules that they're comfortable with. And I think that if they're going to start buying different things, you don't want to be spending $500,000 per thing. You won't, like, maybe, like, for me, I would be like, okay, around $100. Like, if it's less, I'm sure, but that's kind of where I want to stick. But then I can get a few different games, and that's cooler, right? And even if I don't play them, I'll hold them and open them up and touch them, and that, you like to do that. Get left, right? So I think that's where we're going. We're going with overall systems that are less expensive to play into. Again, not going to change with GW. That's going to stay the same, but we'll see more of that. And I don't know how well the books will do. Like, if you just make a book, I think you can sell the book, or you could, but I don't think that's where that's always going to remain pretty small unless you've got a heavyweight behind you, like maybe Osprey's doing it, so then it'll do more because it's Osprey. But yeah, so if I was to encourage people what to do, it's difficult because sculpting, you're gonna have to you're gonna have to invest some money into sculpting. Even if it's a few £1,000, maybe $5, it's still something. But that's where I would go. I would create a universe where, if you're going to create a game, make it such that, one, it can be solo played. That'll be helpful. And two, that they have the opportunity to buy everything that they can in the system, even if you offer at different stages. So you have a $30 book, and you have a $50 box or $60 box that has some stuff in it that's extra cool, and then you have like a bigger box or miniatures available separately. So then they can go with the spectrum, right? That's what I feel. I feel that method's going to be the way it's going to go more and more for indie guys. Yeah.
So what about with your games? What have you got in the pipeline? Is there anything you want to tell everyone about?
Well, I mentioned a few things. Stalingrad's is already out there. It's got for people who like medium to heavyweight games, medium heavy, whatever. It sings very well. Got a great amount of feedback and voting on BGG and stuff like that. That one's already available for sale. It's on the market. And then we have Escape from Project Riza, which is in GameFound now. It expands the universe from the first one. It's a kind of like a sequel. And then I have Gates of Nilheim, which is the Viking Nordic horror game, which is basically an RPG light dungeon crawler type of game, but with a narrative campaign and with a choose your own adventure style. And there's and that's going to launch on November the 15th on GameFound. So it's a crowdfunding. You get a free gift too if you go on early, and then that'll get put into your pledge when you make a pledge. And then I'm working on another game next year that's going to come out called The Cats of Mont Saint Michel. So it's kind of like it's like a swashbuckling cat fighting in revolutionary France on Mont Saint Michel, which is this monastery that's on the Atlantic in France, just like 100 meters from the shore. And it's got a whole history. So it's very historical, actually, but with cats. And you'll be playing cats, and there's like a dachshund in it and an owl, and you're evil. You're fighting like the rats. And there's like cockroaches and stuff like that. And then I have like more, like then I have another game coming out at the end of next year that's going to be the plan now. And this is a good thing we're talking about theme, because I keep not sharing what theme to make it. But it probably will be like a World War II zombie. It'll be in the same universe that I created, but I'm going to probably label it a little bit differently. So I'm going to call it Diesel Punk, which is a genre, and there's not a lot of diesel punk games out there. So this is diesel punk, which is basically 30s to 50s. It's in the World War II era, and that game will be a little bit different from how the other games work, as in they'll have a tactical dungeon crawling mode, and then they'll have a strategic world mode where you're building your caravans and like arming up your vehicles, kind of like a Mad Max thing, but 1940s. So that's what's coming up for my stuff for Raybox Games. Yeah.
That all sounds awesome. I'll put links down below so people can find all these like Gates of Nilheim real easy and get to that web page. So that would be cool. But thanks, Marco. It was great to catch up again. And I'm really excited about the new Gates of Nilheim and the miniature prototypes I managed to get.
Yes.
Are just fantastic. I can't wait to share those with everybody and get them painted up. And the combination of the Viking and horror, I think, is just brilliant. So thanks again for taking the time out to share your thoughts and ideas today. It was really awesome.
Well, thank you for having me. It was a pleasure, and good gaming.
Thank you so much for listening to the TTSG podcast. I hope you enjoyed this episode. And as always, I'd love to hear your thoughts and feedback. So add your comments down below or drop me an email to Lee, that's Lee, at tabletopskirmishgames.com. I think it would be fitting to end today's podcast with a Viking quote, and as this podcast is designed to help people write their own tabletop skirmish games and gain some insight into what can be a challenging industry, let's get some motivation from this quote, which goes, "Oftentimes it is not the numbers that win the victory, but those that charge forward with the most vigour." If you've always wanted to write your own game, then I think you should definitely go for it. Set some goals, have some self-belief, work hard, and I'm sure you can get your game published too. Thanks so much for listening to the podcast. I hope you enjoyed it, and I look forward to seeing you here for episode 4, where I'll be discussing terrain, in particular budget terrain, with Kenneth from Alrathian's Crafts and Battles.